Everything old is new again. America's entertainment pop culture talk show.
It may well possess a rudimentary intelligence.
I'm trying to think, but nothing happens.
Felt a great disturbance in the force.
Hello, I'm Mr. Red.
Come on, bark like a dog for me.
Where's the goodies?
Leave the gun. Take the cannoli.
I bet you wouldn't have done anything like this if Mom and Dad were here.
You filthy criminal.
Excuse me while I whip this out.
Go ahead. Make my day.
Here are your hosts, Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
You unlock this door with the key of imagination. Beyond it is another dimension. A dimension of sound. A dimension of sight. A dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both shadow and substance, of things and ideas. You've just crossed over into the Twilight Zone.
Welcome to Everything Old is New again. It's nice to have Rod Serling introduce us, young, wondrous David Cohen.
Yes.
How about that?
Wasn't it great? Like, every time he show up on the Twilight Zone episode, he would just, like, step into frame, and he always had that cigarette. Remember that?
Yes.
Like, he was smoking right there. And he looks so cool, you know?
We'll talk about the effect of that cigarette later on in our show here on Everything Old is New again, as we experience all things Rod Serling with the author of a terrific new book, Rod Serling, His Life, Work, and Imagination. Not just talking about the Twilight Zone, although that certainly is what he's most commonly referred to now, 60 years after the beginning and premiere of that show. We're here with Nicholas Parisi. Nicholas, thank you for joining us.
It's great to be with you, Doug. And Dave, thanks.
It's great to experience so much fun speaking last week and now this week about Rod Serling with a member of the board of directors of the Rod Serling Memorial Foundation, a charitable foundation organized and dedicated to preserving and promoting Rod Serling's legacy. He's also a former staff writer and editor of, drumroll, the Good Times magazine, a very popular magazine here on Long Island for all things pop culture and music, really.
Yeah, it's been around for a long, long time.
Yes, so we'll get to that in a minute. My first question to Nicholas Parisi is, do you see that the legacy of Rod Serling's work, including The Twilight Zone, but through all of his work, that you see remnants of it still in our pop culture today?
Oh, no question about it. I mean, you see his influence, the influence of The Twilight Zone particularly. We've seen it in a dozen movies that have been certainly influenced by The Twilight Zone. I won't even get into the the titles, but I think we can all guess the titles. And that's not to say that they're borrowing in some weird wrong way or anything. It's just there's an influence there, yes. And I mean, there's nothing more specific than the new Twilight Zone series that's coming out this year on CBS All Access. Jordan Peele is in charge of the new reimagining, Dave, of the Twilight Zone, and I'm cautiously optimistic about it. I'm looking forward to seeing what Jordan Peele does with it.
And I think another show that gained a lot of popularity, and I might have had something to do with the relaunch of Twilight Zone, is Black Mirror, the show on, I believe it airs on Netflix, if I'm correct. But that was definitely influenced by Twilight Zone, and has become quite popular on its own. I don't think it's good, but
I also, you saw about mentioned movies. One that comes to mind is that the one with M. Night Shyamalan, the one I See Dead People. When I saw that movie and the ending where, is the twist that the one character you think is alive is dead, did that, you tell me, that came to, the minute I walked out of the movie theater, I said, M. Night Shyamalan must be a huge Rod Serling fan and somewhat of a copier of...
I don't think there's any doubt about it. Yes, that particular movie is definitely Twilight Zone-esque, no doubt about it.
And I think M. Night's, most of his career thereafter, most of what he did, he looks for those twists. I will at least put it that way.
Yeah, I think he almost got pigeonholed into that, and
yes.
Now he's required to have the twist. And
if you don't have
sometimes he doesn't.
But think about how difficult it must be to do it. What did he had 93 episodes? 92, I think he wrote.
Yes, yeah.
For the Twilight Zone, Rod Serling did it 92 times, and let's even just go by his numbers. 63 of those times were successful. I think they all were, but try to do that 63 times.
Yes.
It's like trying to do everything old is new again and do 253 shows and all of them be spontaneous and stellar shows.
Right, and we've had maybe 4, so it's really tough to do.
I was going to say only geniuses like us can do that. I was taking the other standpoint. All right, now let's get back to it. I think with respect to the effect in our pop culture, you could also see it through William Shatner on, believe it or not, a number of years back, Third Rock from the Sun.
So how was your trip, sir?
Horrifying at first. I looked out the window, and I saw something on the wing of the plane. The same thing happened to me.
John Lithgow, if anybody's sort of not too popular anymore, but John Lithgow certainly did the movie version of 20,000. I'm sorry, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, right?
Yeah, what a great in-joke that was. Yes, they both played that particular part.
And Shatner goes to conventions, and if he's asked, he'll talk about the fact that his kids love especially when he was younger, when he was traveling on an airplane, for him to call over, or the kids would call over the stewardess or the flight attendant, and Shatner would be by the window, and they'd say, "Yes, can I help you?" And Shatner would give them the look, and the kids would say, "Dad, give her the look, give her the look." Shatner just loves to tell that story that to this day. And, he really got a kick out of being on that show twice, I think. When Shatner was on.
That's right. Oh yeah, another one was one of my favorites too, with in the booth, future? Right, predicting the future.
Which is, we'll get to it, but he had the ability, Rod Serling, to attract such tremendous stars on his show. Let's just listen. If you haven't seen what we're referencing here, or can listen to it, maybe it'll bring some memories.
What's going on? He's pulling up one of the cowling pipes. There's a man out there. Voice down. You look.
Well, that's a little piece of it, but that's William Shatner acting or overacting. I don't know. He didn't come out and say anything negative about William Shatner, though, did he ever?
Oh, no, absolutely not. And I got to say, William Shatner gives a terrific performance in Nightmare at 20,000 Feet and in Nick of Time, which is the episode you had mentioned about it. And Richard Matheson wrote both of those episodes, and Richard Matheson loved Shatner's performance in Nightmare at 20,000 Feet particularly.
Right. And
I think Shatner always overacts, but I think in that episode it actually really worked.
Now, Richard Matheson, we had a theory when we talk about zombies. Richard Matheson did the original zombie work. I forget the title.
I Am Legend.
Right, I Am Legend. And I don't know that Richard Matheson would have done that, this is stretching, had not William Shatner and Rod Serling produced all of his work and make him famous, so to speak, and give him the confidence to do I Am Legend. So therefore, we say that Rod Serling and William Shatner are the grandfathers, we'll say, of all things zombie. We're doing it tongue-in-cheek, but it's a long road to go, but they had some influence, no?
That's a bit of a stretch.
That's a little Twilight Zone-y. I don't know.
Exactly. Now, we spoke a little bit earlier about an episode, Walking Distance, which I just think is an amazing episode. Let's just hear a little piece of it to refresh your memory as to what this was, and let's dive into it with Nicholas Parisi.
Mark, I only wanted to tell you that this is a wonderful time of life for you. Don't let any of it go by without enjoying it.
And also, like all men, perhaps there'll be an occasion when he'll look up from what he's doing and listen to the distant music of a calliope, and hear the voices and the laughter of the people and the places of his past. And perhaps across his mind there'll flit a little errant wish that a man might not have to become old.
Now, this is a very poignant, I think, episode where a gentleman goes back in time, however it happens, meets his own parents, and meets him as a child, meets himself as a child, and says, I just wanted to tell you, man, have some fun, enjoy the life now. Then he meets his dad later on, and dad says, listen, you got to get out of here, and by the way, stop looking back, look forward, enjoy your life now, looking forward. Nicholas, am I wrong or right? I mean, was that something that sticks with you?
Oh, it's probably my all-time favorite episode. It is, Rod Serling at his most Serling-esque. I mean, this was Rod Serling with his heart completely on his sleeve, which is one of the reasons I think we love Rod Serling, is that he was not afraid to wear his heart on his sleeve as a writer. He got criticized sometimes for being too preachy or too on the nose with this type of stuff sometimes. But if you were the choir, you didn't mind being preached to, and I don't mind being preached to, particularly in this episode. Rod Serling, just to give some background quickly, is that Rod Serling grew up in Binghamton, New York, and when he was 18 years old, barely barely 18 years old, he went off to war. He joined the Army, and he went off and he fought in the Philippines. And he came back scarred from it. He came back really just scarred for the rest of his life. And for the rest of his life, he just wanted to return to that innocent time in Binghamton when he was a kid and when he got to ride the carousel and eat cotton candy and just before the war, before Pearl Harbor. And that's what this episode is all about. This episode is about a man who just wants to go back and just taste that one more time. And as you said, it ends on a somewhat optimistic note with his father saying, hey, if you go back to your own time, there's cotton candy there, there's band concerts there. You just got to stop looking in the past and look for them around you. And he goes back with that, being a little bit wiser at the end of the episode. And I love this particular episode.
Exactly. I very well said. I can't add anything to it other than to say that Mr. Parisi was an editor for a magazine on Long Island we've talked about, Good Times Magazine. When David and I were in high school, we were in a band that David created a song, and it doesn't sound perfect here, but it was called The Twilight Zone. And I'm going to play a little piece of it when we get back. When we get back from the break, I'll tell you why I play this song and how it relates to the Good Times magazine. The background of this and everything old is new again.
You're listening to Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
The use of traveling back in time is a very effective way of producing contrasts, producing a kind of a freewheeling storytelling device, which is why I used going back in time. And there's another reason, is that every writer has certain special preoccupations and predilections. In my case, it's a hunger to be young again. A desperate hunger to go back where it all began. And I think you'll see this as a running thread and through a lot of things that I write. And part of creativity, of course, is being able to convey that kind of nostalgia, that kind of bittersweet feeling to those who have never had it.
And we're back on Everything Old is New Again with David Cohen and Nicholas Parisi, author of Rod Serling, His Life, Work, and Imagination. Look up Barnes & Noble or Amazon.com and or your local bookstore and get this book. It's so much fun. We're having two shows here, and we can't cover just a smidge of what's in this book. That was Rod Serling talking about basically being nostalgic and one of the themes that he has throughout his writing. And I would ask Nicholas Parisi, Everything Old is New Again is a show that we take a look at entertainment from the past, and we want to see, where it developed and what entertainment there is today that builds upon the foundation of the past. Do you think that's something that Rod Serling, along the lines of what he was saying, would have agreed with the theme of our show in some way?
In some way, yes. He was a nostalgic kind of guy, so he did. He treasured it. He treasured his memories. He treasured, what he grew up with, the things that he grew up with. At the same time, though, Rod Serling was also a progressive guy. He did not, other than his characters may have gotten stuck in the past, but Rod Serling, other than yearning for that past, he didn't get stuck there. He did move along in terms of his art, in terms of writing, in terms of movies, in terms of he did progress with the times, but he did always have just that affection for nostalgic, for his past.
And I think, David, that's exactly what we do, and we always bring forward something new to the entertainment that's happening, whether it's characters or just the guests or whatever we do on our show, that we try to show the modern day take, this nostalgic look at the future, we'll say, right? So do you think Serling would have even listened to our show? What do you think?
I don't know if he would have listened to it, but if he was forced to listen to it, I think he'd appreciate it. Yeah.
Would he have listened to that song that we just heard in the last section from the news?
Yeah, then he would have sued us because, if I remember correctly, we used the Twilight Zone theme as part of that song.
Exactly.
Which
we would have looked
illegal.
forward to that. At least we would have become famous for something. Infamous is better than nothing.
I guess.
I don't know. The reason why I say that is because we're here with the editor of this magazine that existed back in the 70s when we did that song and were a band in 1979. I don't know that you were editor of the magazine then.
No, I came along long after that.
But you've heard about this review. I know it's on a board somewhere. For the news, I'm going to read you this. I can see if we can get a kick out of this. The news headlines their performances with the best of the Beatles, Cars, Kinks in the Knack, and the records, as well as Dave's popish new wave-ish original. The band has an inbred sense of humor. They perform the version of the Twilight Zone theme that stands out as their best live tune. They also include various sight gags in their act, and the group peppers their show with general comic relief. And they have a demo tape, blah, blah, and there's a quote, "Our originals have a unique new original sound, and our live show is a gas." That's the review in the Good Times magazine right here.
Who wrote that? Did you write that?
No, I don't know who wrote that. I was going to ask Nick if you have any idea who wrote
I
that.
have no idea. No idea.
How about that for a kick? What did you do as the editor? What was that all about?
Oh, I wrote for, I wrote music reviews like that, and CD reviews and, things like that for Good Times. And I also worked there as, editing copy and that kind of stuff.
So you're great at looking at, you went back 60 years to review all the material and more. Beyond 60 years to review Rod Serling's life, work, and imagination. I'm sure you still have the keys of imagination and to the Good Times magazine. So if you feel like going back and finding out a little more about the news and what inspired that review.
And if you want them to come back and do a reunion show, then I would definitely seek psychiatric help.
It's all in jest, but we were touching upon the Twilight Zone, and we did a song. I figured I'd throw that out there. Let's take a look at Changing of the Guard, though, a show that I think is very poignant also and shows some of the themes of the Twilight Zone and of Rod Serling with respect to looking back and with respect to the future.
I died in Roanoke, Virginia, sir. I was conducting research on X-ray treatment for cancer. I was exposed to radioactivity, and I contracted leukemia.
That was an incredibly brave thing you did, Bud.
I kept remembering, Professor, something you told me. A quote, a poet named Walter. He said, "I would be true, for there are those who trust me. I would be pure, for there are those who care. I would be strong, for there is much to suffer. And I would be brave, for there is much to dare." I never forgot that, Professor. That was something that you left me.
Now, Nicholas Parisi, you're familiar, of course, with that episode, and your thoughts, just generally speaking?
Sure. Well, a couple of things about that particular episode. First, Donald Pleasance, starred in it, and he's terrific in it. But that episode, ties back to Rod Serling's college days when he went to Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio, and Antioch's first president was Horace Mann. And Horace Mann is famous for his quote, "Be ashamed to die until you've won some victory for humanity." That is something he said to the graduating class in his first year there, and it was repeated to the graduating class of Antioch every single year after that. And Donald Pleasance, the character there, quotes that particular line, and he believes that he hasn't lived up to that admonition, and contemplates suicide because he hasn't made some mark on humanity. And these ghosts come back to tell him, "Yes, you did. This is what you did for us." And that's it's typical Rod Serling again.
I know it's putting you on the spot, and we all rack our brain. Do you see anything in entertainment, whether it be movies or television today, that approaches themes like this, inspirational and or looking at teachers and learning? And I mean, there was Dead Poets Society, yes, but I'm just saying, like, just in general, I'm not saying there's none of this in entertainment today. That's not fair to say, but to see it so well done and lasting 60 years, and if you watch that episode, it's as relevant today as it was back then. No?
It is, and that's, it's amazing about the Twilight Zone in general that it's really the only black and white series that today is relevant, really. I mean, and I love lots of black and white television series, but none of them are like the Twilight Zone. None of them we're really still talking about. I mean, we're not talking about I Love Lucy. I mean, I'm sure you've talked about it on this particular show, but there was a magazine that came out not too long ago. That it was a British magazine, and it ranked the top 100 television series of all time. And it wasn't just science fiction or fantasy or anything. It was top 100, and the only black and white television series on the cover was The Twilight Zone. And surrounding it was Mad Men and Game of Thrones and Seinfeld. But The Twilight Zone, it's the only one we're talking about like this. And a gigantic reason for that is just the themes that Rod Serling was dealing with were timeless.
And also those best ofs, I object to many of them, even with baseball and all, because it's made by a 30-year-old who wasn't exposed goes to and doesn't appreciate sometimes the past. So to see that they even were able to break through that wall,
exactly.
You know what I'm saying? Of that sort of, I didn't see it, so I didn't grow up with it, so it doesn't mean anything. There's a little bit of that goes on with those lists too, you know?
Sure.
And to see that he was able to break through even that, if that even exists, I'm just saying, is an amazing treat, if I will. Now, I would want to play another one here that hits topics that you don't always hear also, that he hit a lot, anti-war, and also father-son relationships, and a love of each other, which I don't see much in television today either.
How come you're 10 years old again?
It doesn't make any difference now, Pop. We're here and we're together. We can go on some rides.
Sure we can. But as God is my witness, Pip, no man ever loved a boy any more than I love you.
I'm dying, Pop. I'm sorry, but I have to go back.
Hey, God, I'll make a deal with you. I give you the sodden carcass of an aging, weak idiot. I give you me. All you have to give back is Pip.
I mean, it's hard to grasp in a couple of seconds here. But, David, you going to say something?
No, that one was, I remember that vividly, and I love Walter. I mean, I love Jack Klugman. I don't know. It was a little sappy for me.
It hit for me because long story short is this gentleman's son is that young boy, but that's part of the Twilight Zone. His son is dying in Vietnam, and long story short, he gets to experience an hour with him through the magic of Twilight Zone, and then exchanges his life for his son.
Right.
So, I mean, a theme like that, Nicholas, I mean, this is something that he had many times, or was that the only time he did something father-son? And
well, the father-son dynamic, he did hit on it a few times, if not necessarily. I mean, directly father-son. I mean, there's a particular episode of Night Gallery called "The Messiah on Mott Street," which is about a grandfather and his grandson who have this tie, and that's a beautiful story about this grandfather who's on his deathbed and wants to stay alive for his grandson because they're all they have for each other. And this episode, In Praise of Pip, is it hit for me too. I love this episode, and one just kind of, it's a trivia aspect of this episode I point out in the book is that it turns out that essentially the first half of this episode, In Praise of Pip, actually Rod Serling took it verbatim from an earlier script that he had written for Kraft Theater called Next of Kin. It's essentially the same story up until the point that he goes into the Twilight Zone. The point that the Jack Klugman character goes into the Twilight Zone and meets Pip, that's original to the Twilight Zone. But in the other story, it just ends where he's in the mob bosses. If you remember, he goes to meet this mob boss who is handling his betting receipts, and he gets threatened and whatever. So that was almost verbatim right up until that point in Next of Kin, an earlier episode that he wrote.
I will say this to David Cohen. When did you see the episode? Do you remember? Like years and years ago?
I saw it years and years ago, and then I saw it after I became a dad. So
okay, because I was going to say, because when I saw it originally, it meant nothing to me, and it was one of my least favorite. I saw it last night, and I don't know. It really had an effect upon me. I have a 6-year-old, and it was relatable to this character and so forth. Listen, it's very personal too of what he does. He's not going to hit. Every theme is not going to hit every person, but we're still talking about it 60 years later.
Sure.
And what a performance by Jack Klugman. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I was going to sound like a broken record because I keep saying how great the actors were, but Jack Klugman was tops. Jack Klugman was probably Rod Serling's favorite actor, and he starred in 4 different episodes. This is a tremendous performance. Earlier one called A Game of Pool, which is a George Clayton Johnson episode, one of my favorites, and A Passage for Trumpet was another Rod Serling episode that starred Jack Klugman, and he's tremendous in that as well.
You like Odd Couple, you see these, you go, that's the same guy? Like, what a range. The man was tremendous. All right, we'll be back on Everything Old is New again to continue all things Rod Serling. We may talk about a little bit of that Night Gallery show. Why not? It's the theme of that show, believe it or not.
Now, back to America's entertainment pop culture talk show. Everything old is new again, with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Welcome, art lovers. We offer for your approval a still life, if you will, of noise. A soundless canvas suggestive of sound. Some ghosts come back to haunt. Others come back simply to pick up where they left off. Our painting is called Pamela's Voice. And this is the Night Gallery.
And this is Everything Old is New Again, admiring the work of Rod Serling, and even more so admiring the work of art that was just created by Nicholas Parisi, this 550-page book. Well worth it. Rod Serling, his life, work, and imagination. You're going to learn things that you never knew before about Rod Serling and entertainment in general. And there was one episode I remember called The Eyes. And that was in the original pilot, they call it, but it was a movie with 3 separate stories. And I think Rod Serling created, right, this whole concept of looking at a painting and let's tell the story behind the painting?
Yes, that was his idea. Yeah, he wrote that was the hook in the pilot film of those 3 episodes. They all began with a painting, and that's how the series was pitched.
Which to me is genius. I mean, it's just so simple but so perfect. You know, they wanted an anthology, something not Twilight Zone. How do you introduce it? Take a look at this picture. We'll tell you the story.
Yeah, in fact, his original idea after the Twilight Zone was to do something similar in a wax museum. It was going to be called Rod Serling's Wax Museum, and it would begin with Rod Serling kind of taking a stroll through this spooky wax museum, and he would stop at a figure, and he would take the curtain off of the figures, and that would be a character in this particular episode. He would tell you about the character, and then it would go into the story, and he basically just traded wax figures for paintings.
Pretty cool. And just for kicks, one that was pretty interesting had Joan Crawford and Steven Spielberg directing her in Eyes. I just want to take a look, admire the talent that surrounded Rod Serling in the beginning of this series, or at least for that first movie. Did he have control over hiring Spielberg and Crawford, or was he never in control of this series at all?
He certainly had a lot more control of that movie than he had of the series itself, right. And I don't know if he specifically hired any of them, but he certainly had a say, because I saw lists that he made himself of who he would like to cast in different parts in this film. In that particular episode, Eyes, Tom Bosley appears in Eyes. Wow. He plays a gambling addict who gives up his eyes for Joan Crawford's character. Well, guess what? Rod Serling wanted Jack Klugman for that particular part. His preferred person was Jack Klugman. He probably wanted Jack Klugman for everything, to tell you the truth. So he certainly was at least able to give the studio his preferences and whether they took them or not.
Now, I met Jack Klugman at a bookstore in Huntington years and years ago. Long story short, I asked him about Rod Serling. He basically told me there was a time, and this is now on YouTube. It must be the same story. He said there was a time when he was acting with Art Carney. I never saw this episode. I don't know what he's talking about. Where the two of them were involved and they were acting and improvising and showing emotions of happiness, the two of them, because one character just finally sold, I think, as a script. And the director said, wait a minute, there are lines here. You guys aren't saying the lines. And they called Rod Serling and had him come to the set. And Rod Serling's, and they asked, Rod, could you tell them to do the lines? Rod says, let me see what they're doing. And Jack Klugman and Art Carney was doing such a tremendous job of promoting the emotion of the scene. Rod Serling, for one of the first times, when I understand, said, all right, you know what, forget the words, do what you can, but what's on there is magic. People will understand it because of the emotion of that. And that was, again, Jack Klugman.
That's absolutely true. The show was called The Velvet Alley. It was a Playhouse 90 co-starring Jack Klugman and Art Carney, and Jack Klugman and Art Carney were Rod Serling's probably two favorite actors. He loved Art Carney just this much less, if that, than Jack Klugman.
They were his odd couple, I guess.
Yeah, no doubt. And that was the one time he got to have them both in his particular show in the Velvet Alley.
I never understood it. So that was a Playhouse 90.
Yes,
that's why it didn't make sense to me.
And it's a great show. Yeah,
and that's something. So he was really attuned to the actors too, and I'm just saying, like, sometimes writers are writing and then they put the script off to send it off, and that's it. He had a talent for talent.
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, another example from Playhouse 90 is a show called The Dark Side of the Earth, which co-starred, it was Van Heflin, but co-starred Earl Holliman, who starred in the Twilight Zone pilot, Where Is Everybody? And the story that Earl Holliman tells about that particular story is that Rod Serling was on set, and Earl Holliman went to him and said, I feel like this character would say something else about this other character, Van Heflin's character. I think he would say something to him about his background, about what they did. And he said he was amazed, Earl Holliman was, that Rod Serling didn't say, go back to acting. I'm the writer. You take care of your job, I'll take care of my job. He says Rod Serling wrote down what he was saying, and basically rewrote the script and used those lines that Earl Holliman gave him. And he said, I never got over that. I never got over how this guy didn't have an ego about what I was suggesting to him. And that is the way that Rod Serling was with actors. If you were a good actor, he respected your input, and he would work with it.
And he didn't just play the Hollywood game of saying everyone's great. Obviously, you've heard that already with Dennis Hopper or whatever.
Definitely not.
So that was, he said he liked you. You could respect that. Yeah. Now, with respect to the Night Gallery, at some point he lost more and more control over it. But why did the producers of this show not respect his opinion? Apparently.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of a long story.
Oh.
Well, I can sum it up in two words, honestly. The two words that I can sum it up with are Jack Laird. Jack Laird was the producer of Night Gallery, and Jack Laird and Rod Serling simply did not get along. And in my research, Jack Laird is the one person in Rod Serling's life, in his career, that Rod Serling did not get along with. I mean, Rod Serling got along with everybody. He really, truly did. And Jack Laird and he just did not connect from day one. And so the creative partnership, if it was ever going to be such a thing, never materialized because they didn't see eye to eye. And not only that, but Jack Laird, and this will be the kind of dun dun dun, Jack Laird did not think Rod Serling was a good writer. I mean, Jack Laird just was not a fan of Rod Serling's
Why
work.
did he hire him to begin with?
Well, it was Rod Serling. I mean, Rod Serling's name was on the show, and so Rod Serling at this point, you have to understand, he was 45 years old, about 45 years old, and he was burned out. He was burned out 10 years earlier. So when he started Night Gallery as a series, he did not demand creative control of the series, and I think he did it. Rod Serling gave lots of answers for why he did this, but I think the true answer is that he didn't want it. He didn't want creative control because he didn't want to put in those hours again. He didn't want to put 16 hours a day into a series. But what he thought that his name would carry some weight. He thought he would have his say in the shows because he was Rod Serling and his name was on the show, Rod Serling's Night Gallery. But what happened was Jack Laird said, "This is my show. They put me in charge of producing this show," and he didn't particularly like Rod Serling's work, and that was the beginning of the end for the
only thing I can say is what a fool. What an absolute fool.
Jack Laird.
Yeah. You look him up. What else did he do? I mean, I guarantee, I don't know this guy from Adam. I don't know. I haven't researched it, but I guarantee he didn't do a heck of a lot of successful things.
Not a lot. Yeah.
He didn't have the career of someone that would, looking at his work 60 years later with a brand new book, Rod Serling, His Life, Work, and Imagination, that's selling like hotcakes, Nicholas Parisi. Let's take a look at something else that might be unknown to some people.
Really did it. You maniac! You blew it up! Oh, damn you! God damn you all to hell!
That's the first swear word that's ever been on our show in over 250 episodes.
Well, that was actually on our second show as well, the same exact clip.
Wow.
How about that? It sounds like me when the mortgage bill comes in.
I think you said that in the second show.
I think I did. Trying to reestablish. Now, what people may not know, even though he's credited on the screen, what is his relationship to Planet of the Apes?
Yeah, I am amazed that to this day, when I say that to people that he co-wrote Planet of the Apes, they're shocked. They never knew that. Yes, he was the first writer. He was the first writer assigned to write the adaptation of Pierre Boulez's novel. Monkey Planet was the original name of the novel, and he came in very early in the process, right after the book was published. Basically, an organization called King Brothers Productions contacted Rod Serling and said, "Hey, we got an option on this book. We'd like you to write it." And they sent it to him, and he got to work on it immediately. And he wrote a couple of drafts for King Brothers, and then King Brothers went to the wayside. I guess they lost their option or whatever it was. And then Arthur Jacobs, the eventual producer, got a hold of the property and officially hired Rod Serling to write it. And Rod wrote numerous drafts of the screenplay for Arthur Jacobs. And during this time, Arthur Jacobs believed in this project. He believed that Planet of the Apes was going to be a gigantic smash hit, and he really, really pushed it. And he was running into brick walls in Hollywood because everybody just thought it was too risky. They thought it was too big a risk. They thought the big problem was, how are we going to get people to believe that these apes talk? That was the big worry of everybody. How are we going to make this not a comedy, not make people think this is Dr. Dolittle? And so after about 2 years of working on the script, Rod Serling, working on the script, it still had not sold to anybody. And one of the reasons it hadn't sold was because of the budget. It was perceived that it was going to be a big budget movie, and again, it was a risky big budget movie. So they wanted to reduce the budget, and one way to do that was that Rod Serling scripts were set in a modern city. They had the apes in hats and suits and ties, and that's how they were like us, except they were apes. So one of the ways to do it was to take it out of the city and bring it back to a pre-industrial civilization, which meant really rewriting Rod Serling's script. And at that point, I think they almost mutually agreed, that they would part ways because they weren't satisfied with the script anyway. They weren't satisfied with the dialogue, and Rod Serling admitted that he basically just written himself out on it. He was burnt out on it. He'd been working on it for years, and so he stepped aside, and Michael Wilson Wilson came in, and Michael Wilson basically rewrote all of Rod Serling's dialogue. But what he did was he kept the structure that Rod Serling had created from the novel. Rod Serling took the novel and really made it filmable. He created the plot points that it had to hit to work. He created the structure of it. He created the ending. Contrary to some misinformation in the past, Rod Serling wrote the ending. It's in his early drafts. So he gave it that structure, and then Michael Wilson essentially rewrote all of the dialogue, and they shared credit on the final.
We'll be back right after this. And everything old is new again, rushing through, but hitting all the highlights of the world of Rod Serling. But there's tons more to learn in Rod Serling, His Life, Work, and Imagination by Nicholas Parisi.
This is Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Do you know why there's night all around us? Do you know what the blackness is? It's the hate he felt, the hate you felt, the hate all of us feel, and there's too much of it. It's just too much.
A sickness known as hate. Not a virus, not a microbe, not a germ, but a sickness nonetheless. Highly contagious, deadly in its effects. Don't look for it in the twilight zone. Look for it in the mirror. Look for it before the light goes out altogether.
Welcome back to Everything Old is New Again. This is Douglas Viviani with David Cohen, and we're here with Nicholas Parisi, Rod Serling, His Life, Work, and Imagination. Also, if you want to go to Facebook, go to Rod Serling Dimensions on Facebook. You could look up that's your Facebook page for
the book. Yes,
for the book. So take a look at that. It's got some great information to entice you to purchase this great book. Also, you want to look at the Rod Serling Memorial Foundation, of which Nicholas Parisi is on a board of directors. Go to rodserling.com. What are they going to look at when they see that?
Well, rodserling.com has information about the foundation, but it has all sorts of things about Rod Serling. I mean, it has links to some of his speeches. It has links to pictures and interviews and things like that. So it's a resource.
Terrific. Now I'm going to ask you real quickly, and I'm not going to go too much detail. You're going to have to buy the book for this, but there was a sequel planned that Rod Serling had in mind and was asked to do, The Dark Side of the Earth, a sequel to the Planet of the Apes.
Yeah, well, pretty much immediately after the film opened, it was clear that this was a gigantic hit. It was a worldwide phenomenon, and Rod Serling went to Arthur Jacobs and the studio immediately with some sequel ideas, and they batted some things around. The Dark Side of the Earth was the title of Rod Serling's outline for a sequel, and it ultimately wasn't used. And I mean, they were not crazy about the first idea, or at least some of the early ideas he had, but they were open to more, and they went back and forth, and basically, as it turned out, he was not going to have time to write the sequel no matter what, so they parted ways at that point.
But take a look at what he had in mind for the sequel. When you buy this book, you'll get a kick out of what he could have been, and was very thoughtful. I think would have added more than what we did see. That's what I think.
I agree with you.
And finally, there was a TV show, and from what I understand, he was asked to contribute in some ways to that, no?
Yeah, he wrote 2 scripts for the television series, and he basically wrote the Bible for the show. He wrote the outline of what the show was going to be about a couple of humans with an ape with them being chased by the other apes, and as their enemy, and so he kind of gave it the structure. And his 2 scripts were not produced, but he basically developed it for television.
What do you think about the end result of the franchise going the way it did, and at least the presentation or survival of his ending, which I think but makes the first movie so memorable?
Yeah, he was never we've talked about this before, but he was never one to toot his own horn. So he was certainly never going to say, hey, that ending propelled the franchise. He never did that. And I believe from what little he said about the sequels were just that he did see, I believe, the first sequel, and I'm not even sure if he saw any of the ones after that. I'm not positive.
So one of his lesser known works, lesser thought in his mind, and meanwhile still prevails to this day as a work of art. And now we just heard a little piece on the way in of I Am the Night, Color Me Black. I would say one of the main themes of his work is also his anti-prejudice. Now, I think he worked tirelessly, I guess against sponsors, and maybe this is one of the reasons why the Twilight Zone itself was an anthology, and it was also something that maybe set in a science fiction-ish kind of way, because he was able to approach a lot of topics like prejudice, where maybe he couldn't have done it straight out, no?
Yeah,
At the time.
that's exactly it. He ran into so many problems with sponsors in his previous attempts to address some of these subjects. He had the power to do it on The Twilight Zone and do it in this context. And again, I think it was just the case of it just became less controversial to do it this way.
Right.
So he was able to do it, but it was never any less poignant. And in this particular episode, I Am the Night, it is very powerful.
Yeah, it's tremendous. You got to look at some of these episodes, and also when you look at this book, Rod Serling, His Life, Work, and Imagination, you get it on Amazon.com. You will see some of these episodes, some behind-the-scenes discussion of these episodes, and summary of them, and maybe a little bit about what went on behind the scenes. I don't want to let on about too much of that, but that's really a lot of fun to hear what Serling was thinking about these things and what was changed and or what actors we used. And speaking about actors, we spoke about this previously, but let's listen to a little bit about Rod Serling talking about some of the actors that he admired.
But the young lady made reference to a marvelous Art Carney piece we did about a drunk who's a store Santa Claus, who finds a completely, a bag of plenty, which continues to throw out gifts. And Carney, well, you talk about beautiful people. Art Carney has got to be one of the stunning men that I've ever met. Apart from his vast talent, is the fact that he's a dear guy and the most predictably good performance. There are just a handful of guys who you never have to worry about. Jack Klugman is another. Walter Matthau is another.
He goes on and on with a number more of a list. I cut them short there, but he knew how to surround himself by some quality people.
Yeah, he attracted them, and especially in The Twilight Zone, because again, at that point, Rod Serling was so prestigious and he had such a reputation that people really did want to work for him. People wanted to do those shows. Jack Klugman particularly, Jack Klugman would say, and this is not hyperbole, he would say, I don't have to read the script. If it has Rod Serling's name on it, I'm going to do it. And that was true. He really felt that way, and a lot of people did at that point.
Now, did he socialize with any of these actors? I didn't ever hear about that, or maybe I'm wrong.
He did. He was friends with some of them. I think one of his best friends was Dick Berg, a producer of a lot of different series at the time. So he was friends with some of the people on his level as far as executives go.
Right.
But yeah, he was friendly with some of the actors as well.
Now let's turn a little bit. Now we know maybe you don't know. You'll learn more about it in the book. And we mentioned it a little bit here that he joined the military at 18 years old. It was World War II, correct?
Sure. Yep.
And was a paratrooper and saw some action.
Yeah, he saw some terrible action, unfortunately. He volunteered for the Army the day after high school graduation. And Rod Serling was born on Christmas Day, 1924. And in those days, Binghamton High School, their graduation was in January. It was January 6th or something like that. So he volunteered for the Army. He was barely 18 years old. He had just turned 18 a couple weeks earlier. And he wanted to be a paratrooper. That was his idea. Somehow he got this idea in his head that that's what he would like to do. And he got his wish. He was assigned to the 11th Airborne, a 511th Parachute Infantry Regiment. And what happened was that Parachute Infantry Regiment was used as an infantry. They were, they only really did one combat jump on Luzon. But before that, they were used as an infantry in Leyte in the Philippines. And he saw some heavy combat in the Philippines and some terrible things, and he came back from it a different person. He came back with, I think it's a given, he had a post-traumatic stress disorder, and he dealt with that for the rest of his life.
Now, did he deal with it through writing, I presume, is what we're saying?
No doubt.
In some ways.
No doubt. He admitted that he began to write as a way of therapy, as a form of therapy, to get through some of this trauma that he had dealt with.
And it had to have given him some of the pessimism that's shown in some of the work, such as the elegy.
The antidote. Give us the antidote.
There is no antidote, Captain. Even now, the eternifying fluid is coursing through your veins.
But why? Why us?
Because you are here, and you are men. And while there are men, there can be no peace.
So, right? Am I wrong? Did that inform him in that regard?
Oh, yeah, no doubt. And the interesting thing about that particular episode, that's actually a Charles Beaumont episode. He didn't write that, but it's interesting that so many, the other writers were very much in the same wavelength as Serling in a lot of these ways. I think a lot of Beaumont stuff, Beaumont stuff was certainly very, very different in terms of his storytelling technique, but something like that could have come from Rod Serling.
Right.
He could have said that exact line. George Clayton Johnson does the same thing in a couple of episodes where you think, well, Rod would have said that same thing, even though it was a different type of story. So that's what gave the Twilight Zone some of its cohesiveness, is that these other writers did come from the same school as Rod Serling.
Right, it's hard sometimes to tell who wrote which episode.
Sometimes, yes.
Let's take a look a little bit about Rod Serling speaking about something that's a little cautionary tale for us all.
I heard your voice do several cancer commercials.
I guess the sense of that is what you're trying to say is
Right.
to do as I say, not do as I do. I'm addicted, man. I got the monkey on my back, and its name is nicotine, and my child is, one of my kids is in this audience, and is probably hating every time I take a drag. And I wish to God I didn't have the habit. I swear to God. I've tried to kick it several times.
Very sad. He died at 50 years old from a disease or whatever. Well, what did he die from? Related to smoking, no?
Yeah, well, he basically almost died on the table. He had a heart bypass surgery, and it didn't work out well.
Right, and so cautionary tale. And let's take a look at a more positive thing. He looked at the future of television in 1972, and look what he said about it.
You envision as being the future of the industry.
My guess is that ultimately cassettes, paid things that you can purchase and insert into the machine, are going to wreak a tremendous change in what you're currently viewing. I think you're going to see a lot of full-length theater, major motion pictures.
I was no fool, let's put it that way, right?
It's 1972, and VCRs really didn't become commercially available till like 78, or even later. So yeah, he was definitely ahead of the curve.
And we're ahead of the curve here, just peeking into a little bit of Rod Serling's life, work, and imagination with Nicholas Parisi. Please go to Amazon.com and buy this book. I'm telling you, you will put on. It's one of these books you will put on your shelf and revisit again and again, because there's so much there. It will inspire you to watch some of these shows, not only The Twilight Zone, but some of these other movies. And thank you, Nicholas Parisi, for being here. We've had a great time, and I wish you well with the book.
Thank you, Doug. It was a lot of fun.
All right, great. We'll be back next week, and Everything Old is New again with more. Take a look at world of pop culture entertainment as we see it.